So Hemshech Chaim Beis, volume 1, this is discourse 40, bottom of page 311. So, essentially we're talking about two types of Hamshachas, two types of transmissions. One that brings existence to its source and root, to its best possible scenario, filling any lack and void, which is primarily the avodah, the work of the Avos, but it's mostly a work in Ruchnis, above. And then there's the Matan Torah, which draws down a completely new energy that's transformational, that elevates, and is what he called Yiseicha Ba'atzmus, that number one comes from Eira Bligvul, and number two, that's why it has the power to actually transform existence. So going back to the principle that nothing within a structure can change a structure, that's essentially, you can elevate a structure, you can refine a structure, but to actually transform a structure, you need something outside of the structure. On the other hand, something outside of the structure is not integrated in the structure. So you really need a combination of Gvul and Bligvul to really have the best of both worlds, where you have existence and you connect it to something that's beyond existence. So the energy within existence helps us bring it to the place that it's integrated, internalized. And the energy outside of existence, the transcendent energy, which will be Matan Torah, Sinai, brings in an energy that's beyond existence. But since it was preceded by the first step, the preparation of the Avos, then that too can be integrated. So that's the process here. It's the process in all real transformation. Transformation that annihilates the previous entity is not transformation. That's annihilation. That's called becoming something else. We want it in the structure of existence, integrated, but we want something beyond. And that's where, of course, the complications are, because you're dealing with very seemingly paradoxical paradigms. And the only way to do that effectively is obviously to work on both tracks and to also recognize that there will be a place where the end, so-called the energy that's within the structure all the way to the top, is going to touch the energy that's beyond the structure. The Avos bring it to the point, literally almost the point of no return, and then comes the next step. Now, obviously, we haven't yet addressed that interface, how Gvul jumps to Bligvul, even though it's been hinted to and alluded to, or essentially because Atzmus obviously is beyond both. So ultimately, in the code of the Eira Gvul and the code of Eira Bligvul both have in them the message that they both come from the same source, though they are two tracks. So there will be a place that they can meet. But again, we want them to meet in ways that we can relate to, not that Atzmus relates to. Atzmus doesn't need any process. But for us to relate to, we need to go through the steps in simply another way. Essentially, it's going to come down to that Moichin. The mind is one of the key elements of interface, because the mind, as I've mentioned many times, has both extremes. Excuse me. Has both extremes, because on one hand, it's clearly a mind of existence. A mind is a logical and rational and part of the structure. But at the same time, as he keeps saying, the Moichin is higher than existence, because Moichin is really something that's isolated and internal, as opposed to relating to another. So what we have essentially is that by God creating a mind, He gave the ability to have a taste. The mind allows a human being to get beyond their subjective structure and subjective interests and identify with another perspective. That in turn becomes a great tool to go from the limited structure that we are to something beyond us. So with your mind, you can go to places that your so-called your own parameters wouldn't let you go. If you basically your own inclinations and disposition. But the mind can take you there, and Meichin, especially when you go to the Etzem HaMeichin, as he said, Etzem HaChachma, you can go to places that are literally into Atik itself, the Ashirus that he was talking about, not just Daimach, but also the level of Ashirus, which in this case is the Bligvul of Atik and beyond existence. So the challenge of all this is logically we can all talk about this. The challenge, of course, is to do it, to actually be able to, because here's where it comes down to. We are all human beings, mortals, in a finite world. We go to work, we have responsibilities, And it's nice to talk about Bli Gvul, but do we actually have it in our lives? Where do we have it? Besides dreaming about it, or besides enjoying the possibility, do we actually have transcendence in our lives, and how much do we have it? At best, it's more or less limited by our reality. The goal is obviously an integration of the two, but the truth is you can't really achieve it without real avodah. It's not enough just to talk about it. We can sit and talk and indulge in it, but ultimately to do it, this is where you require the avodah of learning about it, but then davening with it, which ultimately you need to train our emotions. That's the key. The whole battleground is the emotional world, the place where our subjectivity plays itself out. Like he said earlier, the emotions, they begin immature, they're selfish, they're self-interest driven, self-absorbed. And to train those midas, that they should understand what the transcendence of the mind, to lead them into Kesser and beyond, that's where exactly that's the crux of the problem. So to go with our minds there, we all do that at times. We dream, we imagine, and at times we even experience something transcendent. But to bring it back home to your subjective reality, that's the greatest challenge. So when you talk about a chassid really working on himself, that's the work. It's actually the work of Sfir Seimer, Bir Hamidus. It all comes down to whether your emotional makeup will become refined and matured. I see people who have brilliant minds, but their emotions don't grow in at all. They're able to escape. Their emotions remain the same childish emotions, except they have great minds. There's a very big dichotomy going on. And the challenge is, does it actually affect a person's reactions? Simply put, that today you may get angry at something and be impulsive, and tomorrow, because you trained yourself, you won't. At the same situation, you will not upset you. That's a perfect test. And that you're not going to find so easily. You'll find people who have so-called self-control, and they may overlook things, but their emotions still seethe when certain things happen. And a true Baal Meichen, a true intelligent person, is a person whose midas actually change. For example, if a little kid came over to you right now and started kicking and scratching you, you're not going to get down, hopefully, on your arms and your knees, and start kicking back, right? Why? Because it's a child. But if an adult insults you, it's more likely that you will react, because it's significant, it matters. A person who matures, what happens is petty things don't bother you, and you realize that certain things are still not in your league. And that's a real Baal Meichen, a person who comes to a point where he has a certain level of patience, a certain level of perseverance, a certain level of tolerance. That certain things just don't bother him because he lives in a different world, and emotionally will not react the same way. Will not react as another person may react, because his emotions have actually grown. That emotional intelligence that I'm talking about now is the real battleground. That's why I'm going back to Meichen Midas. You saw before we learned, it starts with a level of Katnos, and then you get to Gadlus. Talked about Yaakov, Yisrael Zuta, Yisrael Saba, all the way to Abba Ve'ima Ilan. What's the point? The point is that that's where the battle is. So in higher levels, it's the Gvul, is really, Midas is defined. Emotions, human emotions, are the best psychological application of what we call the Koyach HaGvul, or the power, the Gvul in our lives. And the Meichen is the bridge to bring that Gvul, that all those parameters and limitations, to a place that's beyond Gvul. But the challenge is to change the Midas, not to escape them, not to run into the higher levels, but to actually change them. And that's where Avodah comes in. Without that, it can't be done. Then all you do is you understand. It's like reading a beautiful poem, or hearing a beautiful song. It lifts you to another place, but it hasn't changed you. Transformation only happens when that work. But the power is there to do it, because, as he said, the real power of Bli Gvul is that the etzem, what he called the Yisod of Atzmus, is it has transformational power, not just revelatory power, which the Avos have. And that's a big, big difference. So, basically, you can say it's like almost three levels. There's where we are right now. There's the Avos, so to speak, within us, which creates revelation and opens us up to new realities, and does the best you can do with the structure that we have. And then there's the higher dimension, that is the real Bli Gvul, that we haven't really yet gone into in depth. I mean, we discussed it earlier in the structure of the area of Bli Gvul, but the real power of Matan Torah is something we still have not really yet reached. So we're now in the place of Nayim Beis where he's really winding down and finishing more or less what the Avos accomplish, essentially how the gvul of the structure of existence is primed and prepared for the new bli gvul energy. Okay? So we're not going to compare notes where we stand in Aveda in this, right?
That's the question. Can someone change his midas? I don't know. I mean, if he has chesed, he could redirect it from chesed to kedusha, but I don't know if he can change it.
You can't change it, but you can refine it.
I don't know if he can change it.
First of all, we didn't say change the color of your eyes.
Right.
We're not talking about changing the color of chesed. Number one, what you said is on the simplest level. You could have chesed and it could be used in the wrong things. You have chesed used in the right thing. That's number one. Number two, chesed is called gadlus hamidus, hagdolas hamidus. They actually could be refined and matured. I just gave an example. When you're 5 years old, things upset you. You didn't get new emotions when you turned bar mitzvah or an adult. Nothing entered. What happened was the meichin is growing, maturity, and hopefully that maturity also made hagdolas hamidus. Just like your body grew, the midas grew.
So they're taming the midas.
But I said now growth and maturity. So a thing that would have bothered you when you were younger should not have been bothering you when you're older. Same emotion is not being influenced the same way. So it's the emotion is there, but your reactions are different. And then finally, there's also where you focus. What you love. Forget about klippa and opposite. You can love money, and you can love intelligence, and you can love chassidus. They're all chesed. They all come from chesed. Let's say it's all chesed. You're attracted to all these things. They're very different attractions. So besides where the midas are directed, the midas themselves definitely can be matured. Look, when we say a Baal Meichin is able to tolerate another opinion, why is other people can't tolerate another opinion? Because their midas are at full blaze, and their mind is not able to mature their midas. So they get upset, they are offended, whatever, etc., etc. Divrei chacham benachas nishma. So you don't think that a person can refine themselves and be more refined? Absolutely. We're not talking about changing the personality of a person. That's another thing. In Chassidus it says, L'shanis midas tivim, or L'shanis midas tivim, L'shanis teva midesav. It is hard work, but it does say the possibility. That's the highest levels when you actually can change. Like, for example, the story with Rabbi Hanania ben Tzad, who is it? Hanania ben Desa. He brings it, that his teva was pazranus, to give a lot of tzedakah. So the Gemara says, he was told to limit his, because it was his nature. In other words, there's the aveda of actually changing your tendencies. A person may be like chesed without gvura, so they're trained to add some gvura in it, so there should be always, like what he says in Perek Tezvav in Tanya, to go out of your regilus. So that's also absolutely doable. Look, the bottom line is like this. The key thing is like this. If we had no Eir HaBligvul, and we were not created b'Tselem Elokim, you'd be right. A stone can't change its personality, and a leopard can't change its. But human beings are given a neshama. Neshama comes from Atzilus. Atzilus is Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad, all the way up to the Sheidish. So built into our midas is the capacity to transform them. That's the key. So it's not you're changing, you're basically revealing the divine element, and divine chesed of Asiyah within our being is rooted in chesed of Atzilus, which is rooted in chesed of Esesfer Sagnuzis, which is rooted in Shir Atzmei B'Kayach of Er HaBligvul. So somewhere embedded in your simple chesed inside of you is literally the Bligvul of Alakus. However, you just don't jump there so quickly.
That's when Neshamas Yisrael. What about Neshamas Yisrael?
First of all, I think everyone has me'ain, everything has similar. The question is on the measure and degree. Everyone has a similar, but that's asking a completely different question right now. Do you find Jews finding it more? You find Jews to be more refined than non-Jews?
No, that's what I'm saying. According to your explanation,
because of Aveda is lacking. And that's because of Aveda. It's not what we're talking about potential.
Definitely think we're more. Sorry.
Fine. It's just as a given by birth.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I see that so and so. I don't see it as a blanket statement with physical eyes.
I have a question. It might be off topic, and they don't answer me.
But it's a separate. I don't want to go into this topic, especially now.
No, but there's chesed and chesed and love. It seems to be used interchangeably, and I don't understand that. If I'm off topic, you don't.
No. The English translations of words are inadequate. Chesed is kindness, love. These are translations of chesed. Chesed and ava are associated with each other.
I don't understand that.
I don't know what you chesed is then. Then you have to define chesed. How would you translate chesed?
Chesed is giving out to another.
Where did you get that interpretation from? Who told you that's what it is? And maybe love is giving out. Maybe that's the definition of love. Giving out to another. What is love? Look, listen. It is off topic, but I'll just say the following. There's many elements to chesed. There's chesed being attracted to something. I love something, so I'm being drawn to it. But there's also an element of love that you want to give something to something you're drawn to. So you're really asking, there's elements of chesed. So if you're talking about the pure definition of chesed, chesed is translated as ava, as love. Chesed can be kindness. Loving kindness is maybe the closest translation. But chesed, of course, chesed has the element of being attracted, and gvura repelled. But gvura also is severity and din. If chesed is ava, gvura is yira. You're talking so many dimensions in each one. I don't know if you could just say it's one thing. It's a full-bodied entity, chesed, and you have to really talk about it from many levels. Love is definitely a component of chesed. Nothing to talk about.
So know that view when they had love for Hashem, or did they?
He actually didn't use the word love. He used azevus and the imus. It is a formula. He said it was ava b'chol me'edecha is a mitzvah. Whether that was what they had, I'm sure they had that too.
Pinchas had more. They had more.
It wasn't about more. It wasn't more. It was whether it was what was the kavanah.
Yeah,
their self-absorption in it, in the Ruchni, it became overwhelmed them.
Self-love.
In other words, they enjoyed it. Listen, you cannot criticize them. It's a very high level.
I understand.
There's nothing selfish about them.
Sweetness.
It was the sweetness. It was like it's like
Ecstasy.
we learned that. But I want to just go back. I want to just say what I was going to say. It's a big question. It's a big discussion about Bir HaMidas. Later in the Hemshech, all the way to the end, he's going to talk about the different levels, how we grow from Ibur, Yanika, and Meichin. But suffice it to say, as opposed to some secular psychological models, that a human being is a truly animal, and just like a lion cannot change, we cannot change, Torah rejects that outright. The whole mitzvah, the whole Yiddishkeit would fall apart if you can't expect change. Because we believe that there's a tzelem elikim in a person. That changes everything. Take away the tzelem elikim. If we don't have atzilus within us, so to speak, or like I'm saying, the eser sfiris, from which is rooted nishtalshel mehem the eser keiches, and goes all the way up, then yes, then we are part of the creation, and we can't change creation.
Suppress it, but
We can say
You're saying this based on what?
Based on whether, but the idea of a ben.
You bring me. This is Qur'an. You bring me proof. The same Tanya says you could change.
Yeah.
So if you bring me logic, or you bring sources now. If you talk sources say both.
The Rushim is easy to change relatively compared to the thing.
I don't know what you mean by the word change. Refine and mature. Is that called change by you? Let me explain. That's what I'm asking you. Is refining and maturing something change?
You can make it Adler, in other words, instead of loving this, you're loving.
But I would call that change. You don't call that change. Fine. So then there's semantics. Fine. So what do you mean? Change, that if you're a Baal Chesed, that you become a Baal Gvura? I don't think that's even expected. It may be expected in a step in Aveda, so you shouldn't get too comfortable with your nature. But for a Baal Chesed, that person that Neshama comes, let's say, Shammai should become Hillel, it doesn't say he should become Hillel. Shammai was Gvura from time to time.
That's what I mean. You can't change it.
But that's not what we're talking about. That's not refining and maturing of Midas.
Enjoying a good steak now.
No, but you do find Shammai going back, and at times thinking like Hillel does. Because you don't want anyone trapped in their midah either. But still, of course there's inclination. Of course God created people who are neita more to chesed, more to gvura, more... Listen, you have... Moshe Rabbeinu was in a neshama of chachma. Avram is chesed, Yitzchak is gvura, Yaakov is teferes. No one ever suggested that Avram should become gvura. But if Avram is only chesed, there's yotzim imenu, so... Right. But that doesn't mean that Avram's chesed didn't refine itself as he grew. That's a whole other... So refinement and maturity is... You're talking about changing colors. I told you. No, you're not talking about changing eye color.
I can take a whole lifetime and say it's changing.
No one said one has to change that. Even the Shanis Midas Ativim and Teva Midesav doesn't necessarily mean to change the Midah. It means to change its personality, to change its... The point is, let's go back to what I said. The problem with midas is not that they're bad, it's that they're selfish. They're self-absorbed. They think, what is in it for me? I like it, I don't like it. That's what a midah is. We spoke about it. Mazen negei, what the Lashon said. Yeah, the hergeshatzme. It's not a midah. If you talk about an idea and everyone says, what's your opinion on this wall? That's a thought. If you talk, what do you like it or don't like it? That's a midah. So the question is our midas going to be self-absorbed, or can they be trained to go beyond themselves, to love another, not just to think of everybody as a prop in your life? Just using, that's how you have to think. We're not talking here, so we're talking about the shift is in the direction. Is midas only me, and everything is about me? Or is midas also about you? And it's giving, and it's a form of transcendence and so on. I'm saying that's where the battle plays itself out. Like your mind can tell you something is right, but you don't act on it. Your mind can tell you should be now giving, and instead you're taking. When it finally affects your midas and you actually act on what your mind is telling you, that's where a shift happens. And then you can actually shift. So there's natural growth. We all naturally mature. But then there's Avedic maturity. I would say our natural maturity is far more intellectual. And emotionally we don't mature so much as we'd like to believe. And you need more Avedic. Because I know people who are 30, 40 years old and their emotions are just the same like when they were 12. They just know how to control it. So they're not going to have a tantrum in the street. But they have a tantrum inside. That's the difference. I mean, I told you the best example is
they can beat up their wives.
The best example is how petty things affect you. You know the word petty is. How small things affect you. You'll see people who, they are affected. They're insulted. They're quickly. All that is they're emotional creatures that are affected.
Objective. What's petty? So for somebody, petty is one thing. For somebody else, it might not be petty at all. It's very objective.
The one who says that, so that itself needs maturity to determine what petty is. If someone thinks that, one person thinks this is petty, another person doesn't, I would suggest probably it is petty, but he doesn't yet know it. So good, of course. I understand for a 2-year-old child, it's not petty to be playing on the floor with toys and having a tantrum or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. Anyway, so let's go to the next Maimer, Maimer 40. So, what's the summary for this Maimer? The summary that the Frierdiker Rebbe has a summary for each, like the beginnings of each Maimer. So the summary for 39 was Hamshachah Shayidei HaTeirah. Interesting, it's actually the end of the Maimer. This one is going to be Hagilui Be'elamis Hu B'midah. That's how Matis. So we're up to the Maimer of Matis, bottom of page 311. So here we go. V'idaba Meishel Roshi Matis L'Bnei Yisrael Leimer. Oh, Lili Nishmas. So the class is Lili Nishmas. Give me the name again.
Chaim ben Eliyahu.
Chaim ben Eliyahu. So may the Neshama have an Aliyah and a Yerida and all the good Zachen. And the family all will, I'm sure, gain new strengths, especially in the spirit of our learning and his honor.
Learning ben Eliyahu.
Yeah. So Shabbos Parsha Matis Terag Tov Rish Tov Ayin Reish Gimel, like Nafshi Tareg. V'yidaber Meishel Rosh Matis L'Bnei Yisrael, and Moses spoke to the leaders of the tribes of the Israel, so to speak. Leimer Azei Tzazog. I love that Leimer Azei Tzazog. Right? Remember in Yeshiva Azei Tzazog? Zeh hadavar, this is what he told him to say, Hashem, Zeh hadavar shetziva Hashem. This is the thing that God commanded. He's talking about the Nedarim. V'tzarech l'haven, and we have to understand, Ma'hu ha'heferish ben shvatim l'matis. Sometimes we say Roshei Shvatim, the heads of the tribes, and here the expression is matis. Sometimes we use the word Mata Ephraim, Mata Menashe, Mata. The Pamim Nemer Shvatim. Sometimes the Torah says the word Shvatim. Kameshakasav Kol Eila Shifti Yisrael, all these tribes of Israel. Or Pamim Nemer Matis. Sometimes the expression is Matis. Ma'wa Hefresh B'neim. What's the difference between the two? Umepnei Ma B'nedarim And why? By Nadarim, by vows, which is the dover that he's talking about, this mitzvah here. Nemer Loshen Matis. And why specifically here do we use Matis and not Shvat? Gamau in Roshei HaMatis. And also, what is Roshei HaMatis? The heads of the Matis, of these tribes. Gam tzarech lohavin mashikosav zeh hadover asher tziva Hashem. This introduction, this opening statement, this is the thing that God commanded. Ma'u hagdama. What is this introduction, Hazez? What is this introduction? Havel alemer. The havel alemer miyad ish asher ki yoder. What would be missing if he said Vaydaba Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes and said to Israel, to the children of Israel, to say ish when a person will take a vow, etc. What do you have to say? This is the thing that God commanded. This introduction. What is this opening statement that Zeh? And again, these openings and ends of Maimarim mostly were written later. So they're a good opportunity. The Rebbe Rashab actually wrote this summary, in other words, of the previous Maimarim and Maimer later. So it's interesting, sometimes the language here will be different than the summaries, the actual chapters. I should add that the summaries at the end of each chapters are also written later. That's why they're sometimes very different. Not very, they're different. And it's actually a good opportunity to see perhaps sometimes different angles, different little nuances that are added.
The Ketzurim were written before
No.
the prompt or after?
No, after. The Ketzurim are the latest thing written.
Okay.
The Ketzurim and the chapter numbers were written last. First was the actual Panim of the Hemshech, then was the beginnings and ends and additions that he added, footnotes he added into this in the second draft. The third was that he edited. They combined it all. They combined the beginnings and ends with the actual Maimarim, and then he edited that. The Maitik. Someone joined the two together, and that would be a third. And then there's a fourth, that the Rebbe Rashab himself went back and added chapters, and added actually, wherever he quoted something from above, he wrote which chapter it was in, and added summaries. Yeah. See, the summaries and the chapters go together, because it's a summary on the chapter. When there were no chapters, there are no summaries. Samach Vav, for example, has no summaries and has no chapters. It's one just Maimarim. That too was written in two stages. Samach Vav only has the first two stages. Ayin Beis is 4 stages. Samach Vav is the actual Hemshech and then the beginnings and ends. But the next step, and then of course summaries and chapters are not there. Clearly, Ayin Beis was going to be was intended to be the magnum opus of the Rebbe Rashab, because you could see from the investment of time and the length of it, and also how he writes it, and also the chapters and the summaries and all that. It's clearly to be the definitive summary of all of Chassidus, so to speak. So Yesh Lahai Lovin Zeh Yesh Lahag Demashnas Boilel. To understand this, let us preface. We shall preface what we learned earlier. The Hamshacha de Teira, who Hamshacha is Ir Chodesh. The Hamshacha of Teira is a new transmission, not like the Ovis. The Ovis, Hagam Shem Sheikhim B'Bchinas Gilei Elokus Be'elam. The Ovis, patriarchs, even though they drew down and they transmitted a divine revelation in the world, Nevertheless, at the end of the day, the energy they drew down is from the structure, from the root of the structure, Arich, all the way back to the source. It's not something completely beyond, a unprecedented revelation. It wasn't unprecedented. And that's what the pasuk says.
When it says Erev Shana, there's a Ir Chodesh every year. Erev Shana is a Ir Chodesh. Is that within the structure, Ir Chodesh, or is that from beyond the structure?
It's a very good question, because you could ask a better question. Before Matan Torah, was there an Ir Chodesh too? For Pashtus, there was.
What, on Rosh Hashanah?
Yeah, but Pashtus, because it's an annual thing from the time of creation. It's a very good question. Never thought about it from before Matan Torah. Remember, there's Chodesh and Chodesh Mamash, as we always say. Okay, so I would say the following. The question is really a little more complicated, because it's not just before Matan Torah and after. How much Aveda is necessary for this Er Chodesh? So if you look in the Tanya, when he says it, he says the Er Chodesh will come down, but he says it comes down through our Tkiyah Shefer and our Tefillah and our Aveda. So the question is asked, and it was once asked by the Rebbe, by Emil, Reb Shmuel, No, Shabbos is a whole sikh about that. Then Shabbos is another story. The Pnim is Chitzenius.
No, but okay.
No. The Yom Tov Shoshan Chol is b'Shabbos without Shefer. Okay, but then the B'dochos, the Malchus Zechrenes v'Shefers, there's still tefillah. The question is was asked by the Rebbe, if you don't, let's say someone doesn't blow Shefer, so if not Shabbos in the week, will it affect the Eir Chodesh? So you have to say like anything, that there's definitely something that's transmitted, but there's no kelim for it if there's no Aveda.
There's always somebody blowing Shefer in the world.
Okay, fine. That's one answer. But like anything in life, hamshachas happen all the time. If you don't have kelim for it, they dissipate. They go nowhere. So they're just in the air. So I would say the following. Even before Matan Torah, there's no problem saying that every Rosh Hashanah was Er Chodesh. But first of all, is the Er Chodesh necessarily from Er HaBlikvul? Not necessarily. Maybe it's Er Chodesh from the source, from Arich. Also could have. He's talking Matan Torah. The real answer is like this: Matan Torah is not Rosh Hashanah. Matan Torah is something happened that doesn't happen every year. It's a once in history thing. So that's for sure a unique experience. That's the bottom line answer.
One time drawing from there.
Yeah, one time from that that changed the world. And by the way, it's not yet. It's still afterwards was Allah Mahar, and the Har Sinai doesn't remain Kaddish. So the work is still there, but it gave the power. The Bitla Hagzeir. That's what happened by Matan Torah. And we say Matan Torah will not happen again, but the power of Mashiach comes because of Matan Torah. Matan Torah gave the power to transform the world. So Matan Torah for sure is a unique, unprecedented. To say there was no Ir Chodesh at all, remember there's Havaya also before by the others, but it's still, so I would say it's Ir Chodesh, but it's not the Ir Chodesh of Matan Torah, 100% not.
Mashiach will bring a higher Ir Chodesh, or just make us absorb completely the original one of Har Sinai?
The answer is both. First of all, Mashiach will be the actualization of what happened by Matan Torah. Like we say, Matan Torah is Erisin. Mashiach is Nesuyin. So clearly it's culmination. But there's no question, once you reach Eir HaBlikvul, you think it's over? The Eir Chodesh just begins then. Then you're reaching a place that is completely... Blikvul doesn't mean a station. The whole meaning of Blikvul is that Blikvul is Blikvuls. So then starts a whole new story, to the point where you'll have Hashemayim Chadashim, Va'aretz Chadasha, all its existence will become new. There'll be levels that were never revealed before. Matan Torah, nevertheless, is still a one-time event. You're not going to have another Matan Torah even after Mashiach comes. Even there'll be Torah Chadasha, and there'll be... Because you have to say by Matan Torah, it was a Gilia Atzmos, that essentially was like a taste. And Tanya says Me'ein. Me'ein ze hoya, kfar hoya leilom me'ein ze b'Matan Torah. In chapter 36, that which will be lost when Mashiach comes, there was already a me'ein that was like a taste by Matan Torah. But there's no question there'll be far more unprecedented. That's why Moshe will learn from Mashiach too. So there's one level is that Matan Torah set the stage for a whole new dimension that would be realized in Mashiach, and then there's stages in Mashiach to the point where, we talk about Chad Charuv, a stage where all of existence goes to a whole new dimension. That's for sure a completely different realm. But you can't remember, there's never going to be another Torah. So not a second Torah will be given, God forbid. It's always, that is the Torah of God. Except it will open up doors to new realities. Bottom line is, once you get into the world of Keser and Atik, it's a whole new world. You're into like the world of light. And then there's infinite possibilities. Basically, I would say the Ovis is the world of Esser spheres. The Matan Torah opens up the world of beyond Esser spheres. If you want to put it that way. Now I understand why he said emes. Remember we wondered why he added the word emes, right? Mm-hmm. Because Rashi says, he says it now. Let me see, where did he say emes? Remember that? Where was that?
It's in the Kitzur, but it's...
Right, we wondered where the emes came from suddenly.
But I guess it's the explanation of they didn't get the real Havaya. The Shmi Hashem lo nedaitu lehem.
Shanim shel Matan Torah ve'emes Havaya. Okay. Fine. I don't know if it's connected, but anyway. So anyways, this is what it says, Shmi Havaya lo nedaitu lehem. So clearly the pasuk says something was not revealed to them. I did not make myself known to them. Anyway. Lo nekati b'midas hamitas shali. Right. I was not recognized, or was not discerned. I did not allow myself to be recognized in my true midah, my midah amitis, the emes midah. The hainu amitis shem havaya atzmei, le'nimshech la'ovis. That means amiti. So this is this Rashi didn't cite before, but it adds geschmack to the whole thing. That the amiti shem havaya, not havaya as it's filtered through Shaddai and Kale. Amiti shem havaya, the true havaya, loy nimshach la'ovis, was not transmitted to the ovis. Liyas hamshachos muraka er de seder shtalshel, being that their transmission is only an energy of the cosmic order. Yet, only thing is, qualify this, they did drew down from the root and source of this cosmic order. How it is inside of Chachma, in the state of Chachma, and through this they transmitted a revelation of the divine. So it wasn't just the others didn't do anything; they did much. But it was ultimately all in Seder Shtalshus from the root and source of Seder Shtalshus. See, he uses Chachma here. And that's what it means that I revealed myself with the Kel Shaddai. Shaddai belakuse lekol beria. That the direct measure and limits of godliness is given to each creature. We learned this before in the definition of dai. V'gam she'ena elam umloi kedai. That lashon was also used before. But what was it? How is it? In what the context there? V'gam she'ena elam umloi kedai. What was the lashon? Kuf Lamed, I think. Yeah, we definitely used it. It's two different lashonos.
For sure, used kedai.
Yeah, I remember it also. I'm putting on this slide also. Where did he use that expression? It was Chol Beria. It was not Kuf Lamed. It's later.
It was after all, like the person that, remember you were like enumerating like 4 person in Shatan?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for, yeah, you're right.
Right here, Gimel,
Where do you see it? By Shaddai from Lashon Shadaim?
That's where he talks about it.
Hold on.
When he says that lashon?
I don't think so.
Always Mshich Hashem Ken Shaddai K'Meshu Batzilus B'chinas Bina. There's Shaddai Lashon Bircha Shaddai.
That's the second type. There's more types. There's 1 second.
After she did.
I think it's a lashon. I think it's Kuf Mem Gimel, chapter Kuf Mem Gimel.
He starts the there.
So just give me a second. Okay, here we go. Look at the end of chapter Kuf Mem Dalet, page Reish Ayin Tes. Lefizi Hashlemish Zeh Madi Isav Medrash Rabbah Oid Pirush B'Shem Shaddai She'ena Elam Muloi Kedai B'Lokusei. That's where it is. It's the second Taitz in Medrash. You see? The end of the chapter. Lefi zeh yesh leimer. That's the kedai. That's it. Okay, fine. So there's in Kuflam, so all these different interpretations. I should gather them together.
Very tough to translate that word kedai over here.
And the Ilkel Shadis.
Why the Kitzur spells it out? Yeah, because he says
the one's not
so
capable.
it's kedai.
Yeah, we had it then when we spoke then. Okay, so going back here, so basically, what the others do? Shadai belakuse lechol beria. That lashon was also earlier. That I didn't find.
That lashon was there. Sure.
Yeah. Basically, it means that godliness is like when we say Hazonim Mefaras L'chol, meaning each creature gets exactly what it needs.
He has enough to sustain all the creatures.
Yeah, but it's still a level of dai, shadai. V'gam she'ena elam l'ay kedai. So what is that second taich? What did I just say? Page Reishayin Gimel?
Reishayin Tes?
Oh, Reishayin Tes, sorry. Okay, so in other words, it's basically the in elam kedai, meaning that another taich is that the world is defining the limitation of the world, that it's not kedai to receive a higher eirab ligvul. So bottom line, however you twist, kedai is a certain limitation. U'kameshin is bar leil davayikach kerach. Now we learned earlier davayikach kerach. Which maimer is vayikach kerach? Was that Reishayin Tes?
That's the maimer, Kufmanala.
Yeah, that's it, Kerach, yeah. Right. Okay, that's exactly. So he actually told us where it is. Now the Ovis is higher than the Hamshacha transmission of creation, al pi Maimer Kav Hamida, which is according to the Maimer Kav Hamida. Like I said, the Maimer Kav Hamida is basically the order, the dictate, what do you say, the ordinance. We called it the yardstick. The ordinance of the yardstick, we also called it like the stylus. What do we say? Kav Hamida. The gauge. That
should be a
measured flow. Kav Hamida literally means a measured yardstick. Kav Hamida. It's like a tape measure. Kav is a line, measure. Kav Hamida. It's a ruler. It's a ruler. But remember, we spoke. It's not just a ruler that measures the flow. It also transmits the flow and regulates it. I mentioned there are things like that, instruments that both measure, and it's like when you have like by IV or other things where you have an instrument that is measuring and regulating the flow. So it's api Maimer Kav Hamida. Maimer Kav Hamida means, in other words, God's Maimer. The Maimer Kav Hamida is how it was dictated to measure. How is it in Brias Eilam? There's a hierarchy. That the transmission in a lower level is not like it is the personality in a higher level. In other words, there's a fundamental hierarchy and structure to the flow within Brias Eilam. That's not what the Ovis. The Ovis imshichu shelo al pi Maimer Kav Hamida. They drew in the air. That's not according to the regular flow that maintains existence. They drew down Elikus Nail. That was their chiddush. Mekol mokem ein zeh er chadash. Nevertheless, it's not an Ir Chadash. So that's why I said there are three levels. Because remember we said the pipes, they keep the flow going, but they can become corroded and rusted, and they did become. Then there's a new, I would say, a refreshed from the source of a gili that comes, that's not according to the regular flow, but it's like I said, you have to flush through the pipes. But you're still dealing with an energy that's coming from Ishtalshlus. That's the level 3. Through Teira Nimshach Gili Er Chodesh Mamash. So Teira is Mamash, a new, unprecedented revelation. Because Gili Er Atzmi, a Gili Er Atzmi, a core energy, not just a ha'ara, a reflection.
I thought it said the Abbas was higher than that creation. It's not going to just be fixing the pipes. Didn't you just say that?
I said this, I explained this maybe so many times.
No, but then how do you say it's just fixing the pipes?
Because the creation doesn't fix pipes. It destroyed the pipes.
During the creation, the pipes weren't clean.
No, what do you mean? So we have Chet Eitz Hadas, and you have all the destruction that the world brought upon itself. So Avos repaired that.
That I know, but at creation...
So they brought it back to the plaintiff at creation.
Oh, they brought it back to at creation, not better than at creation.
Yeah, and also better a bit.
That's what I understand.
This is a whole... I spoke about this for an hour and a half, just this point. That they brought it back to creation and higher than creation. He said this earlier as well.
It's cleaning the pipes then.
It's not more than cleaning. It's cleaning the pipes.
So we give it at creation.
Because, and they brought more, but they didn't bring an ercha. They didn't transform the pipes.
Okay.
Well, no, you could bring more. You could bring more than from creation and still not transform. It said they eliminate. Remember, they had to be more than creation because once you were fixing something, you're already doing more than how it was originally. Originally allowed for the fall. The Avos repaired in a way that it shouldn't allow for another Chet Eitz Hadas. But it doesn't mean that everything is perfect. He said this before. That they also eliminated some of the potential. At creation there was a potential for the pipes to get corroded. They eliminated some of that potential, but not... Excuse me. Okay. Now we however... Oh, it's a long chapter. However, we have to understand, seemingly we have to understand the question now. Isn't it true that kol hamshachas, all the transmissions and revelations in the world, everything comes according to the kav hamidah. Everything comes through this flow. The kav is the one that brings all energy into existence. The same pipes. Nothing can enter into existence if it's not through some type of parameter and flow. So we're not talking about a flow outside of the pipes. We're talking about one that's going through these pipes. The Gam Eris Makifim, also Eris Makifim, transcendent energies, which are not Er Pnimi. They're not manifest and internalized in the faculties. They're also they're in a state of let's call it definition or parameters. There's a weight. There's a type of weight. What's the exact translation?
You have both sides.
Right. It's like the scales that work this way, that they balance each other out. So you put some part in here. But what's the translation harim? Why is it called harim? Because they're
the mountains. No?
But what has it fit? Shakal b'polas harim. He measured them with a weight. But what? But what's harim? How does harim fit in there?
Once you say the harim, they obviously were like harim.
And I'm talking about pshat, simple pshat.
He gave each one, their
due
strength or their height.
Okay. What are you saying? The harim main harim agvayim. Harim are harim agvayim, the tall mountains, liyalim, that are waves.
Harim agvayim like layaleim. That's in Bachnafshi. Harim agvayim like layaleim stairs. We say that every morning.
Yeah, so liyalim is like the waves.
No, I think
how does he translate?
The animals, that the mountain goats.
Oh, that's what Yelim is there. Yeah.
We established the meters, and that's great.
Harim agvayim layalim.
Yelim from Lashon Ayil.
Yeah. And
so the tall mountains and what? What's the
and the stones are like a cover for the.
I thought Ayils were out.
So the tall mountains are basically refuge or the habitat. Habitat for the how would you translate for the goats, for the mountain goats?
I thought Ayils were out.
What? No, Ayil with an Aleph. There's also Yal. There's also Ayil with an Ayin.
Yeah.
Or Yal maybe Yal. What is this in Ruchnis? Bechinas Midas Ta'arechampim. That's Midas, because you're talking about the high mountains. So we said before, Harim was the Avos is Arechampin, not Atik. Arechampin, that's Midas of Arechampin. Hayim gamkin b'mishkel. That means v'shakal b'polos harim.
The high mountains are for the wild goats.
Okay, there we go. The high mountains for the wild goats. Fine. Good. So that's shakal b'polos harim. That even the level of harim, you also have element of measure. Like it says elsewhere. And definitely the imminent and integrated energy, that they have weight and measure. So this is all a question. You're talking about a chadash. You're talking about everything has to go through the kav hamida. He's going to conclude the question.
It's interesting. It's a kav hamida, and he said it regulates at the same time as that it's used and measures. It's like quantum. You change it. It measures it. When you look at something and you measure it, you're actually changing it. It's a very interesting thing.
I wouldn't bring that in here at all. Here's the opposite point. Here it's measure as in measure, not as unlimited. It's a measure. What is the measurement? And what is the measure? It's the way that energy is transmitted and the way it's received, and the way it's received in the elamis. So in other words, what is the kav hamida doing? It's regulating the flow of the energy and also regulating how the recipient receives it. Yedua b'moshel, and now goes a parenthesis, that's how long?
Not too long.
Till paragraph form entire, it's like 8 words, 10 words.
A little more than that. Okay, Yedua, now it's a parenthesis. Yedua, it's known, b'moshel the mashpia makabel, in the example of a transmitter and a recipient, that after the mashpia, the transmitter, it conceals his core intelligence, that includes within it the energy of intelligence that is related to the recipient. Okay, so after a teacher who has to conceal that core energy, which has in it also the intelligence that's going to convey to the student, so what you have in the beginning is a nekuda, a point. And then he breaks it down and fleshes out the details within himself, to himself. That which is capable of being revealed to the recipient. This stage is still commensurate to this level of the transmitter. Even when he's preparing, in other words, for teaching to the student, so he conceals his Atzmi. He has within himself now the seichel for the student. He starts with a nekuda, it develops into details, but it's still all on the level of the teacher. It's like the student within the teacher, so to speak. But it's the teacher, in other words, preparing, stating his mind. He's explaining the two elements of kav hamida. This is the first element. Or maybe the second element, I'm not sure, we'll soon see. Okay. This is still all within the mashpia, and it's still the seichel of the mashpia, and higher than revelation to the recipient. Then that's tzimtzum 1. Next tzimtzum, is 8 tzimtzum. Then you need to have another tzimtzum. That this eira seichel now is not just measured in the flow, the first point, but it should now be commensurate to the containers of the student. I'll explain this in a moment. Let's just read it first. It's very powerful because it's really a method here of how one teaches. So like really preparing a good way of transmitting an idea consists of 2 stages here. That it should be received and contained by the containers and the chushim and the skills, the chushim, the abilities, talents. Chushim here means his particular Sensibilities maybe. Sensibilities fits most of the recipient. Like he writes in the Geras HaKodesh in Tanya 15, in the idea of the kidneys. Klei Yaitses literally means the kidneys, the advisors, because the expression is Klei is a sign, is one of the symbols of, the lev is the place of the heart of emotions. The kidney is the resting place, the dwelling place for netzach and heid, advice. So it was always an expression. I mean, it's not, you say that people have healthy kidneys. Kidneys are associated, I guess, also in the East, in Eastern medicine, with the idea of giving counsel, basically. It's called the kidneys of counsel.
It separates the good and the bad.
So it could be. Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a type of like a regular.
Decides what it decides.
It's a sieve, like a filter. Yeah.
It decides what's good for the body, what's not, and exposes the
Right. So it's considered connected to Yaitses and Sfiris. In other words, the lev would be Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, or Chesed, and the Yaitz, the Kleis with Yaitz would be the two kidneys would be Netzach and Heid, the right and left, Netzach and Heid. Yeah. Then Yesod is the sexual organs is Yesod and Malchus. So the kidneys is Netzach and Heid. So in Tanya he says, it explains Kleis Yaitz, he's talking about basically how a teacher prepares himself to transmit. So what is the Netzach and Heid in Hashpah? What is it? So he explains like this. Is he going to say what he explains? If not, I'll tell. He says like this. Shelo yumshach kameshu seichel tak ma'id. So what does the Kleis Yaitz do in the transmission flow from teacher to student? That it shouldn't transmit the way it is in its very subtle state, b'moiche v'sichle. Oh, this is actually the language in Tanya. Okay. So the teacher has the idea in a very subtle way in his own mind. So it shouldn't transmit. That's what the Kleis Yaitz do. They advise, they filter, they channel. That the flow should not be with that ultimate type of ultimate sense subtlety in his mind and in his seichel and his intelligence. Like yishtanek tzas, that the flow should change somewhat, medakus sichle, from the subtlety in his mind, v'yasav seichel she'ein nedak kol kach, and should create an intelligence that is not so subtle. Kedei sheyuchel haben lekabel. Talk there about Av and Ben, actually, father and son. So know that the child, So know that the child should be able to receive. That's what he says. Okay. So we see here two tzimtzumim. One, that the teacher himself, after he conceals, it's a point, and then he breaks in details what he's going to transmit. And then there's concern about the kalim of the student. See, in the first tzimtzum, there's no concern about the kalim. The first is to just get an idea into words that a student can hear. So it should be away from, it should be a step somewhat removed from the core intensity of the teacher's mind. But then there's looking at a student and saying, here, this student is different than this student. And now you need another tzimtzum, which is applying yourself to the particular kalim, where now it's not just that you brought it down from your seichel, and brought it to a level that it could be now presented. Now you have to actually feed the students. So you could say the first step is like taking the wheat and turning it into bread. Okay, now we can eat it. But you don't give a full loaf of bread to everyone. One child you only give a little spoon. Another one you give something bigger. So that's the second symptom where you're measuring it. So the Kav Amidah is doing both measurements. The first measure, the first Medidah, like you said before the parentheses, is that the Eir Hamshachah should be, how the Eifen Hamshachah Eir, and the second is Eifen She is Kabel Be'elamis. Two separate things. These are the two things. This is what the point and the details that still to himself are the first measure in how the transmission and the revelation should take place. What he says in the Geras HaKodesh. And afterwards, that it creates a seichel that is now commensurate to the particular recipient. That's the measurement, the second measure, that is how it should be received by the recipient. So like I just said, you could have the teacher has already prepared the idea is ready now for consumption. But then different people consume at different levels. They have different chushim, they have different kelim. And that's the second measure. Why am I saying it? Because you can find a teacher who does the first step good and not the second. There are people who do the second good, not the first. And it's going to compromise the true flow. So the key is to take an idea, turn it into something that's now presentable, but then comes step 2, present it to the particular audiences in different ways. I can tell you from my own experience. I have sometimes ideas, and you speak to different audiences, and if you don't adjust to your audience, the fact that you have the idea clear can ultimately be worthless almost, because you're speaking to the wrong audience. You're saying the things to the wrong audience. This audience needs different type of issues. Same idea, and it's not the first symptom. The first symptom was done. The idea has been so-called. You can take, let's say, an article. We're going to study a piece of something written. The written piece is digestible, but it's not digestible the same way for different people. Different people may need different ways of you presenting it. So it's really 2 steps of transmission. It's a gewaldige formula, I would think, not just for teacher, student, and parents and children. It's also for relationships. Like when there's a miscommunication between people. Where's the miscommunication? Have you not so-called did Tzimtzum Aleph, or are you missing Tzimtzum Beis?
You speak to the lowest common denominator, take an average.
Now some people missing both Tzimtzumim, that goes without saying, is definitely going to be a problem.
No, when you speak to the lowest common denominator, the average of the group, or like when the Rebbe spoke, he spoke on 15 different levels at once, but I mean...
the Rebbe did not speak to the lowest common denominator, that I can tell you. Yeah, that's for sure not. I don't even know if he spoke to the highest common denominator. The Rebbe spoke pretty high level. In earlier years I heard that the Rebbe would repeat and explain things if he saw that people didn't get it. Later years for sure he didn't do that. Sometimes he did. I could say sometimes you could see the Rebbe doing that, but not a lot. The Rebbe spoke like a Rebbe. He's not, and we had the opportunity to question and ask. The Rebbe basically forced you to lift yourself up a little higher. It wasn't spoon feeding, that I could tell you. It wasn't also completely over our heads. There were things the Rebbe spoke sometimes, but it was more or less, could be understood. But you had a lot of concentration. You had to work hard to get it. I would say it was, I can't say for middle, I don't know if it's middle. If someone doesn't know Torah, for example, the Rebbe didn't go and speak in a way, he spoke in Yiddish, he spoke the language of Psukim. So right there, you see in other letters of the Rebbe that he speaks in a language to somebody who doesn't know anything from Torah. It's a different language. That's an example of Tzimtzum too. By Farbrengens, the Rebbe didn't do that. He spoke in the language of Torah. In other words, assuming that someone understands that language.
Right. The biggest lie is a 10-year-old don't understand.
But in Yechidus, in letters and so on, there are definitely times. I saw essays from the Rebbe that are written very much for a whole different caliber people. You have that. But Farbrengens were mostly not that way.
So when you speak to a group, when it's the diverse interests, how do you do it?
It ultimately comes down to how well you pick up the vibes of your group. Some people are very good at that, some are not.
Do you look for the average?
I don't look for average. I look for resonance. I look to make sure that it resonates. With experience, you learn to say there's certain things you could say that more or less will cover many different types of people, and you always throw in a little more for some people who... I will always ultimately not want to alienate even one person. So if I see a room, let's say that I recognize, like a class I give, and I recognize 20 people and one person I don't, I'll always assume that I have to say something for that one person. I'll always do that. I'll never ignore that. Because to me, the 20 already get it somewhat. They already identify with you. This person, they don't hear the right thing, will misunderstand or just be alienated or just not get it. So, and it doesn't hurt. See, going to the lowest common denominator without compromising the ideas helps everybody. Because everybody can appreciate that. Like I wrote Torah Meaningful Life. So even though I wrote it for a poem without knowledge of any Hebrew or Torah, but someone that knows Torah can appreciate it even more. Because I didn't write, I myself I'm not coming from an ignorant place. I didn't write an ignorant person for ignorant people. I'm informed from the sources, and I wrote it in a way that is distilled. But that's how it is. If you present something for a very deep idea to even simple people who don't know when I say simple, I don't mean simple minds necessarily, but I mean don't have the background and so on, it helps everybody. Trust me, try it out. Explain an idea to someone that's not familiar with these ideas. It's going to force you to understand it far deeper. To explain Mamala Kalam Seva Kalam to someone that doesn't know those words. You'll be very challenged to do so. Why? Because the question is, how well do you understand it? Do you understand it only for those that know those code words? Maybe you don't really understand it. Maybe it's just more instinctive understanding rather than, real integrated understanding. Like even when we talk these ideas, it's very easy to just bligvul, gvul, it's mathematical. There's gvul meets bligvul, but you want to really apply it in a resonating and real way. There's no choice. You have to bring it into that type of level. This is definitely an art. These two steps. That's another thing. To read the vibes of an audience is another story. How do you read that without them telling you what they're thinking? You could. There's ways. So I think I have pretty good instinct with that. You see reaction, you read body language. It's really about sensitivity. There's speakers who don't really care about their audience. They care about themselves. You could tell in a second. And that's why they won't adjust. They think they're smart and they're just sharing they're bestowing their benevolent knowledge with others. And then you could tell a speaker that's sensitive to the crowd, you'll see, will adjust, will look for the right words, will state something if it's not resonant. Because his goal is to reach people, not just to be mamshecheres. Understand? That's the difference. The first one is a person who knows maybe how to convey an idea. The second one is sensitive to the student. It's a whole different level. And they're not mutually exclusive, but they're not necessarily interdependent. You could have one without the other. You have people that are very good at conveying an idea, but they're not good at measuring it to particular. They may not have the patience, whatever the reason is, or they don't sense the distinction between different students. But there's a very interesting chapter. There's a very interesting parentheses. So next time you have a miscommunication with anyone, think about what's going on. That alone is a birur hamidus, by the way. Because you're saying something, someone else disagrees with you, and you become so adamant and impatient. Maybe you should step back. Maybe, first of all, maybe you didn't distill your idea properly, and maybe the person that's listening is not able to hear what you're saying. It's a good act of restraint and humility. Would you agree? No, I think it's an excellent tool of how you look at yourself and how you're measuring your flow. Okay, so that's the story. The two medidus. This is the example below, and the example of this above is Yuvan dam shochas ovis ugamke b'chitzenis b'chinas chitzenis se'er. That the transmission of the ovis is also an outer dimension of energy. Rakshazeu k'moishu ba'atzmus hamashpia. Interesting. But that's the way it is in the mashpia himself. V'hainu b'chinas eres atzmim the eses sviras datzils b'chinas chitzeni yuson. Means that eres atzmi, the core energies of the eses sviras datzils, the way they are on their external level. V'hainu mashnas bar le'il peir kuf lamed zayin. Look what he said in chapter kuf lamed zayin. This last little twist here throws the whole thing into a nice monkey wrench here. 1 second, let me just see something. I have to see kuf lamed zayin here. Okay, that chapter, I remember that chapter. That was not an easy chapter. He's basically saying these two types of what he just spoke about, the kav amida, that one that there's a tzimtzum, there's a kav that regulates the flow, but it's all within this mashpia. And then the second one, that's for the containers. He's saying that the first one is the ovis. The ovis, what they did was, they took an air.
The way it was formulated.
The way it was an etzem mashpia, and they distilled it. The nekuda and the pratim. That's what he's saying now.
The way it's already formulated to keep it over.
So it's chitzeni yisa'er. But it's the chitzeni yisa'er, but it's within the mashpia still. And not really able to be absorbed by the containers, like Matan Torah. Right. So they did number one more than number two. That's what it looks like he's saying. So yeah, it's chitzeni yisa'er. It's already, it's not the way it is in creation, so it's not even being transmitted at all. They are transmitting, but it's still within the mashpia.
Just like in the mashal, the way the mashpia is.
And seemingly it's missing the second element that measures the containers. It looks like that's what he's saying.
They were missing. You said
I'm
that.
not positive. One second. Okay. This little few lines need a little iyun, but I think that's what he's saying.
They were more iyu chayu.
Right, exactly. Iyu v'chayu instead of garmui, the kelim. Yeah. But iyu v'chayu is chitzeni ser. It's not pnimi ser. It's a chitzeni ser because they are bringing it down into midas, into kelim. Yeah. But okay, so back now to outside of the parentheses. So what do we have?
You made the monument still.
So you have. So it's he's asking a question. Everything comes through the kav hamida, even eris makifim, definitely pnimi. What's the kav hamida do? Two things. It regulates the flow, the way that the flow should, the way the transmission should take place, and the way it should be received in the world. The of is primarily the first. Now he goes even further. Also, the giluyim of Torah mitzvahs also come with measure, in a state of measure. B'chinas medida. The mitzvahs. These are the details that are there in the mitzvahs. So come like tefillin v'tzitzis of Shabbos, like tefillin and tzitzis Shabbos. Tachilukim heim beifani hamshachas. Mitzvahs are not bli gvul. Mitzvahs are very distinct.
It says clearly, obviously, Meshichot Sa'ir, Shezon Tfil Sa'ar Chayui.
Yeah. What's the difference between one mitzvah and another? Why is this one Shabbos, this one's tzitzis, and this one is what do you say? Tefillin, tzitzis, and Shabbos. It's beifani hamshacha. It's the way they transmit. So there's a distinction between one and the others. Even though all the mitzvahs in the parentheses he adds are hamshachas atzmus, are transmissions from of atzmus, makom mokim heim b'mitzvahs chalukis dainu chiluk beifani hamshacha. Nevertheless, that transmission all come from a core place, the core of atzmus, but they're separate mitzvahs, different mitzvahs, distinct mitzvahs, and that's the difference between the way they transmit. They don't transmit the same. They don't draw down and transmit the same energy. This is the distinction in general mitzvahs. And then there's a distinction in each mitzvah itself. In how you do a mitzvah, the way you do it, there's also medida. There's also measure. And that's what the Torah explains. Mefarish interprets and explains how each mitzvah should be performed. And only then does the mitzvah draw down the energy that mitzvah is supposed to draw down. The tzitzis have to have very particular measurements, right? And if you don't do that, it's not the mitzvah. With tefillin be'efen kach v'kach, and tefillin has its particular measurements and parameters. The Shabbos loves man tefillin. And Shabbos is a time that's not a time for putting on tefillin. The mitzvah hamshachah, the Shabbos ain't tzarech hazla tefillin, because of the transmission of Shabbos, you don't need tefillin in that. This is very clear parameters. All this is a measurement and a regulation in the measure of the flow of the transmission of the energy and the revelation. So you just keep on building a case that everything is medida, everything, even hamshachas atzmim, all through particular infrastructure. And also yesh, and similarly yesh medida be'efen gili eira teira be'elamis. This was mitzvahs. Now he's going to Torah itself. Also, the way Torah, the light of Torah is revealed in the world, there's a measure. Ukanoida, as it's known. Sheyesh Teira Atzilus, Teiras Atzilus, with Teiras Abriya. There's a thing called Teiras Atzilus, Teira at the level of Atzilus. There's Teiras Abriya, Teira at the level of Briya. Ukumei Val Teiroscha Shalimadatonu. When we say Val Teiroscha, on the Teira that you taught us, the Pirush Kisra Arizal, that because it explains in the writings of the Arizal, Al Teiroscha, on what's Al Teiroscha? Teiras Atzilus. Shalamadatono Teiras Abriya. What is the meaning of Teiroscha Shalimadatanu? And the Teira Vatzila Shalimadatanu that you taught us in Teira Sabriya. In other words, the Teira goes through stages. How Teira is learned in Atzilus, how Teira is learned in Briya. It's not the same level of learning Teira. There are measurements that Shazawa Hefriz Be'efan Agili Kameshu Batzilus Kameshu Briya. What is it? For this is the difference between the revelation of Teira, the way it's in Atzilus, the way it's in Briya. So summing up, what do we see from all this? That every transmission and every revelation that illuminates in the world, everything is with measure. This is the question. If that's the case, how can we say that the transmission that was at creation, that's according to the Maimer Kavamida, that's according to the regulated flow of this what do we call it, this yardstick? And the transmission of the Ovis is not according to the Kavamida. That's what he said. It's not based on this measuring. And for sure the Teira, Matan Teira, is for sure not according to the pipes, the flow. So we said before that the creation, as he said, is Kavamid. That's the regular flow. The others are not according to the regular flow. They bring an additional, what do we call it, a burst of new energy coming from the source.
Not an orthodox.
Now, I'm not saying not new. A burst from the source, but it's not according to the regulated flow. But it's still within those pipes. And Matan Teira is a completely unprecedented energy. How could you say it's not a Kavamid? Everything comes through the Kavamid. If it has to enter this existence, it has to come through these pipes. So bottom line is, how does something that is not fitting in the pipes come through the pipes? You can rephrase the question that way.
That's the whole question of Ayin Beis in general.
Yeah, that's why this chapter is critical. He's going deeper into the interface of how this works. Right?
How does anything beyond structure enter structure? That's basically the question, right?
Well, yeah, you could say that, but he said it very specifically in those words. Times
10:32.
Okay, so let's start the answer. We'll see how far it goes. Answer is clear. Question is clear.
This is the Manish time.
Which is like the answer to this. The Inyan in this is, however, the Inyan in this is the be'emes kol hamshachat tzarich liz b'chinas medid. In truth, every hamshacha needs to be in a form with measure. So now he's going to analyze, now we're going to dissect a new part of the interface, the stylus itself, the instrument. I mean, not the instrument kalim, the kav hamida. See, till now we were looking at what the hamshacha, the eir, and we looked at the kalim. What about the thing that's carrying it, the kav?
Now we go into quantum.
You'd like that.
But kav is clearly the first part of Gvul, no? Not first part of
Quantum is the lazy man's approach to all Ayin Beis. You just say it's all quantum. And that's it, everything works.
Lazy man.
No, because it's basically saying everything is a paradox. And that's it.
I'm not doing that in that aspect of quantum at all. Not at all.
No, you're saying it could be Gvul and Bli Gvul at once, right?
Yeah, that's just.
Anyway.
Yeah, but that's what tomorrow's going to be like that. We do it at once. I mean, you can learn it.
Listen, I know your mind understands quantum. Does your emotions also relate to quantum?
My mind does not understand quantum. Trust me.
Okay. So the Hamshachas Medida, Arbchinas Kav Hamidi Yesh B'Zekam Madreges. In the level, in the dimension of the Kav Hamida, there's several levels. By the way, I think when I began teaching Yossi's house, it was from this chapter.
Yeah.
I'm almost sure. Huh? By Inyan who the Niksiv, the Inyan this is, it says, Rihine ish mareu mara hanacheshes upsil pishtem biyodei v'knei hamida. Where is this pasuk? Is this in the Yecheskel?
Must be.
Yeah, anything with matters and this. Visions. Okay. So in Ishmareu, the man's visage, as they say, right? Visage is how you pronounce it? Well, Mareu, his look. Ishmareu, his appearance. Is Mara Nacheshes. Is like the color of copper. Upsil, Pishton, which means a psil, a wick of linen, or what do you say, flax?
Yeah.
Flax. Linen is flax. Flax is what linen is made of. Flax is stage one before linen. Yeah. Linen is sometimes we say is what do we say? But how's linen in Hebrew? No, that's silk. Linen has another name in Hebrew, or pishton is both. Pishton is both flax and linen.
Yiddish flax is always flax, but
yeah, but flax is the way it grows, and then you
make it.
Right, exactly. But there's a word for bad. Isn't bad linen? Yeah, levushe bad is yeah. I think bad is linen and pishton is flax. I think.
Actually, bad means midah yvad from a midah, lashon midah.
Oh, that's the.
Linen is bad.
When you say levushe bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't let it bother you. Don't let it bother you. Unless you're kind of gadol.
Okay, psil pishton biyadei. So we're talking about an image that he saw. A person who's a look of copper color, and he has a wick of flax in his hand. Think the image. Let me see here. Copper, wick of flax, a wick of flax. The Knei Hamida. Knei Hamida, not Kav Hamida, Knei Hamida. Now, what does Knei Hamida mean?
An instrument of
like he has a yardstick, a ruler.
It's like a walking stick, no?
A rod.
It's like a stick.
Is it a rod?
A rod.
But what's the Mida part? Knei, I know.
Measuring rod, though.
A measuring rod, like what? Like. Well, it's an interesting image. It looks a little like a guy doing bdikas chametz. Right? You have the psil, and you have the spoon. I don't know. Knei Hamida, and I'm sure there's a taich in Knei Hamida in the pasuk. You think it's just a rod? I think it's more than just a rod.
Where is the Knei Hamida b'chlal? Psil pishton
Is in his hand. That's something Knei Hamida. I'm not sure. Maybe you can look it up. We'll look it up later. Fine. V'yisa b'zeir pasha pekudei, and it says in Zeir pasha pekudei, zamnin kav hamida v'zimnin knei hamida. The inum psil v'knei. I think both things are in his hand. Pishta b'yodei v'knei hamida is like going also on b'yodei. Like he has a psil pishta b'yodei v'knei hamida. You know, you say sometimes flax, not silk, flax in his hand and Knei Hamida in his hand. That's what it looks like.
Why was the flax in his hand? It's also measuring.
I guess so. That's why I want to know what the pasuk is saying.
Sometimes it's a stick, and then sometimes it's a string.
Okay. The Isab, what he says is sometimes we call it Kav Hamida, and sometimes it's Knei Hamida. Sometimes Kav means a line. Knei means a rod. Like not a rod. Knei sometimes also like Knei HaMenera, like a branch.
Something immobile.
Yeah. Something what?
That's firm, that's hard. A string that you measure with is not hard.
Like a Kav Hamida could be a string, or let's even like a tape measure.
Right.
And a Knei Hamida would be more of a hard, like a ruler. Yeah. The inam psil v'knei, and that's what the Zohar says is psil and knei. Psil is Kav Hamida. So psil would be like a string.
When you measure,
a string of flax or linen.
You measure sadis.
So he has like two measuring still called. That's what the Zohar says.
Knei, you said it was the hard one. Now you compare it with the.
No, there's two types. There's Kav Hamida and there's Knei Hamida.
Knei is the soft one before.
No, Knei is not the soft one. Psil is the soft one.
Yeah, right. But how does it compare with Knei Hamida and Kav Hamida? Kav Hamida is the soft one.
Yeah. Okay. Because the difference in general between Kav Hamida and Knei Hamida, is the difference between Chesed, Chesadim, and Gvuras. Because now every measure is a form of Gvura. When you measure something, it's a regulator. Chesed is a flow. Chesed is flow. Gvura are the brakes. If chesed is the gas, gvura is the brakes. So gvura is a regulator and a measurer. Since medida means measure, hu'in agbola shazo hu b'chinas gvura. That's the level of gvura. V'shoshe mebchinas butzina de kardanisa, and its root is from butzina de kardanisa. Butzina de kardanisa is interpreted the ray of darkness. Sometimes it's the ray of light when the dawn breaks the darkness. Butzina de kardanisa.
Butzina is a candle?
Butzina is a ray, a butzina ray of light, butzina kardanisa. I don't know if it's butzina de kardanisa. Shazab b'chinas gvura da'atik shemalubish b'meiches tamah. That's a level of gvura of atik that manifests in conscious wisdom. That is.
Oh, we're talking about the elbows at this point, so it's above the line, so to say.
In the komedi b'chinas gvura, that's medidas gvura. Shash b'chinas butzina de kardanisa b'chinas gvura da'atik shemalubish. This would be Kav Hamida, what he just said. Gvura. Ach Knei Hamida b'chinas chsadim. And Knei Hamida, that's the state of chsadim. Dihine Knei Godlei Butzina de kardanisa. Moshe, how do we translate Butzina de kardanisa?
I always thought the kardanisa means like the skull. That's what I always thought.
Really? I think kardanisa is the darkness. I think Butzina de kardanisa is the ray of light that pierces the dawn.
Yeah, we just said a reverse Kav Kinei. We just reversed Kav Kinei.
But butz, what's butz usually? A ray, that's a ray, yeah. Butzin is a ray. I think it's a ray that pierces the darkness, if I'm almost sure that's what it is.
We just reversed Kav Kinei again. Kinei, you said a minute ago there was a hard one.
Because you're assuming hard is Gvura. He didn't say that. And Knei Amid is Chsadim, the Knei Goydlei, Gedulei, Hu Alamayim. Oh, Knei is a reed.
Oh, so that's the problem.
Like the Yamakonim, you say the reed sea.
The reed is flexible. The reed is flexible, though. No?
The psila is flexible. We'll see. He didn't finish. Why are you jumping to conclusions? But why are you jumping when we're in the middle of reading it? We'll see.
A kohen could sway, but it's not flexible.
Gedula alamayim, reeds grow on water. Now we said no because everybody interpreted before Knei rod. I wasn't sure.
But what's Hamida? What's Kona? Oh, both.
It measures. They're both measurers. In Gedula alamayim, it grows on water. Knei Kane v'suf kamole. So he's talking about the things that grow on the suf, on the water. Ukamoi kashayonud hakona b'mayim. Not v'nod, like the movement of the kona in the water.
It sways.
The swaying of the reed in the water. V'zeu psilu knei, and this is the wick and the reed. The pishton silk ikir gidulei hu mina offer. Its primary growth is from ground, from the earth. Flax grows from the earth. It says vegetarian. That's why it grows individual. What we call bad is individual stalks. Yichidi alone. Shahui is chalkus. That's like division, like gvura, that comes from the side of the element of earth. V'zeu psil v'knei. Hainu kavamida v'knei hamida. So psil, pishton, that is gvura. It's gvura because it grows from the earth, and that's why it's distinct. It's very distinct.
This is like peanut too.
The knei and the knei. 1 second. Zeu psil knei v'hainu kavamida v'knei hamida. That's kavamida and knei hamida. The kavamida b'chinas gvura. The knei hamida chesed. Kavamida is the level of gvura, which is pishton, the flax.
It's offer,
and the knei hamida, which grows in water, which is chesed, is the knei hamida. Va'inyan hu, the inyan in this. I'm going to review it again. I just want to read it to be able to see the whole picture here. The inyan in this is the niknei kavamida hu shenesin mida v'ktzava v'kitzva el atzilis. Kavamida is what gives measure and parameters. Kitzva is the edges, like limits for tatzilis. El atzilis hasfiris b'pchinas ispashtus v'izgalus shalahem. It gives measure and parameters and edges to the Atzilus HaSfiris in the way they extend and their revelation. Every Sfira has a measure and parameter and edges of its extension that until here you come and you don't go further. Chesed doesn't go into Gvura. Chesed is Chesed. You need to do that, but in order to allow room for the Sfira, the other Sfira that is below it. The Kol Zman Shasfira Al Yene Bizgal is because as long as the higher Sfira is revealed, you cannot have the emanation of the lower Sfira. It's only possible when the flow of the higher Sfira stops, comes to a stop. Then you can have the emanation of the lower Sfira. Like for example, the Sfira of Kesed. If its extension and its revelation would be in Ein Sof and unlimited, there couldn't have been any room for the emanation of Chochmah. Like for example, a person below B'keiches HaNefesh, in the faculties of the spirit. The Kasher HaRotzen Hu Bizgalus, when his desire, his will is revealed, Yef Shalis is Galus HaSeichel. When your will is very strong and revealed, the Seichel can't be revealed. Delias Sharotzen Hu Inyan Achar L'Gamri MaSeichel, because with will is something completely different than intelligence. Al Kein Bizgalus HaRotzen Lo Yeh Galus HaSeichel. So when you are very adamant about something, you want it, Seichel is not going to be able to emerge. Because you're very absent, this is what you want now. Because Seichel and Ratzon are not the same world. Like we see actually practically. That someone who is by nature, a person who is very strong-willed. A person who is very strong-willed will not act with Seichel, will not behave intelligently. Being that his behavior is according to will, he's a strong-willed person. He'll not have an intelligent behavior. In truth, Ratzon, a person like that, strong-willed, is not b'chlal shaykh, not relation. He has no connection with Seichel. Because he's always strong-willed, and that's always revealed by him. He'll never understand. He will not understand that as something really. He won't really understand it because his will is so dominant. So we see from this that when the desire is revealed, you don't have Seichel cannot be revealed. Kim Davka cannot emerge. Only when you abate, the desire abates, or the Ratzon abates and stops. Then we can start talking intelligence. I think we should stop here. Because he's going to go now on the Aveda. The whole next piece is all Aveda about how Ratzon. Basically, let's say where we're at. He asked the question: how could everything comes through Kav HaMidah? So how could we say the Ovis and for sure Matan Torah be beyond Kav HaMidah, beyond the measuring? So he answered that everything comes through measure, but there's levels in Kav HaMidah, and has began to explain there's two levels called Kav HaMidah, Knei HaMidah. One is from Chsadim, one is from Gvuras. So Kav HaMidah is like Pishtan from water, so that's from Gvura, from Ofar, and Knei HaMidah is like the reed, which comes from the water. That's Chesed. That's what he said. And so both are part of the measurement. But the real measurement comes from Gvura, primarily from the Knei HaMidah. He didn't yet explain the other one really in detail. He said that root of that is Gvura of Atik. No, I'm sorry. The real measurement comes. What did I say? From Pishtan, not from Kav HaMidah. The real measurement comes from Kav HaMidah. Knei HaMidah introduces Chesed, but he didn't explain what that means yet, because he's then going to a whole discussion to explain it. He started explaining that Kav HaMidah gives a measure to everything. Every sphere needs a measure, and if you don't have measure, once another sphere can't emerge. So in the middle of now, a long discussion, the example being that when someone's strong-willed, Seichel can't emerge. And he's going to go now explain how it's Naveda. I think it's most of the rest of the chapter, actually.
With didn't have the suggestions, I don't think. I don't think you said the suggestions.
I'm sure we learned this beginning of it.
Really?
Yeah. It's not on, we didn't tape it then, it was just learning inside. Okay, we'll stop here. We did the beginning of Discourse 40, bottom of page 311 through 313, the first half of chapter 147.